Luke 22:63 to 71 details for us how Jesus was mocked and brought before the council. The men who held Jesus in custody were mocking and beating him. These were the temple guards. Luke skips the trial that happened in the night. Jesus was first brought to the home of Annas, the deposed ex-high priest. First they led him to Annas, for he was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was high priest that year. John 18 verse 13. Following this, Jesus was brought to the home of Caiaphas. Then those who had seized Jesus led him to Caiaphas, the high priest, where the scribes and the elders had gathered. Matthew 26 verse 57. Only after this, the beating described in Luke 22:63 to 65 began. This was done by the temple guards. The content of their speech proves this. They also blindfolded him and kept asking him, "Prophesy, who is it that struck you?" Verse 64. This was a religious mockery. The Roman soldiers mocked Jesus differently. Then Pilate took Jesus and flogged him, and the soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head and arrayed him in a purple robe. They came up to him saying, "Hail, King of the Jews," and struck him with their hands. John 19 verses 1 to 3. This mockery was political in nature. Then as soon as it was day, the Sanhedrin gathered again, this time in official session, and they conducted the trial described in Luke 22:66 to 71. This was an effort to make the illegal trial legal. From here, there was an official transfer to Pilate, and after a brief interrogation, Pilate sends Jesus to Herod, who sent him back to Pilate, who eventually handed Jesus over for crucifixion. William Barclay details the judicial system of the Jews in these words, and I quote, "The Sanhedrin was the supreme court of the Jews. In particular, it had complete jurisdiction over all religious and theological matters. It was composed of 70 members, scribes, rabbis, and Pharisees, priests and Sadducees and elders were all represented on it. It could not meet during the hours of darkness. That is why they held Jesus until the morning before they brought him before it. It could meet only in the hall of hewn stone in the temple court. The high priest was its president. We possess the rules of procedure of the Sanhedrin. Perhaps they are only the ideal, which was never fully carried out, but at least they allow us to see what the Jews at their best conceived that the Sanhedrin should be, and how far their actions fell short of their own ideals in the trial of Jesus. The court sat in a semicircle in which every member could see every other member. Facing the court stood the prisoner, dressed in mourning dress. Behind him sat the rows of students and disciples of the rabbis. They might speak in defense of the prisoner, but not against him. Vacancies in the court were probably filled by co-option from these students. All charges must be supported by the evidence of 2 witnesses, independently examined. A member of the court might speak against the prisoner and then change his mind and speak for him, but not vice versa. When a verdict was due, each member had to give his individual judgment, beginning at the youngest and going on to the most senior. For acquittal, a majority of 1 was all that was necessary. For condemnation, there must be a majority of at least 2. Sentence of death could never be carried out on the day on which it was given. A night must elapse so that the court might sleep on it, so that perchance their condemnation might turn to mercy. The whole procedure was designed for mercy, and even from Luke's summary account, it is clear that the Sanhedrin, when it tried Jesus, was far from keeping its own rules and regulations. It is to be very carefully noted that the charge the Sanhedrin finally produced against Jesus was one of blasphemy. To claim to be the Son of God was an insult to God's majesty and therefore blasphemy and punishable by death. End quote. Have a blessed day.